مرحبا وأهلا وسهلا فيكم. A huge welcome from the Syrian capital, Damascus. My name is Feras Alkabani. I'm an associate professor of comparative literature at the University of Sussex. I've just come back to Syria and I'm hosting today's event from Damascus from my parents' flat, actually. I haven't visited in 15 years. So it's a great honor to be here, and many thanks to the Middle East Association for coming up with this very historic and very kind of timely event to commemorate the historic collapse of the Assad regime. The way we're going to run this event is basically we've got four speakers, and myself included. Each one of us will be talking about a different kind of aspect of what's happened over the past 15 years. Each one of us will be speaking for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A. Now, as you will have noticed, this is a webinar type of event, meaning that you probably can't see each other. You can see us, you should be able to see us, but we wouldn't be able to see each other. And when it comes to the Q&A section, there will be a feature, there's like a button in your Zoom, you should be able to kind of type in your question. They will select as many questions as we can, and we'll go through them and we'll answer it. Okay, so I just wanted to say also that unfortunately, Dr. Claire Spencer, an advisor at the Middle East Association, hasn't been able to join us today. She was meant to join this event, but due to personal circumstances, she hasn't been able to do it. So we just want to say thanks to her as well for organizing the event, for coming up with the idea, and we will start without further ado. I will start by introducing our first speaker, who's Dr. Rob Pinfold. Dr. Rob Pinfold is a lecturer in defense studies at King's College London. He's got his research focus is on Middle Eastern security, interstate conflict, and the dynamics of civil wars. Rob's talk will touch on the role of external actors in helping and hindering the reconstruction of Syria. So we'll start with Rob now. If you want to unmute yourself, come in with the camera, I'll unmute myself and we'll listen to you. So I'm going to start counting the 10 minutes here. Okay, there we go.
Thank you very much for the intro, Faraz, and it's a pleasure to be here. Many thanks to the Middle East Association. Now, as you can tell with myself compared to the other speakers, I'm not a Syrian. I don't come to you from Syria. So that's why I want to focus on the external side of things, how external actors have shaped the transition and the dynamics that we see unfolding in Syria still at the moment. Now, the first thing I think to note is that this is very much a story of what we in the international security field call second order effects. So kind of knock-on effects or the consequences of other events or geopolitical shifts, either intentional or unintentional, which have had a huge and transformative role in defining contemporary Syria. Well, the first obvious place to start, of course, is the fall of the regime itself, just a year ago. And this was something that was not expected, I think it's fair to say, by almost anyone, friend or foe of the Assad regime. But the fall of the Assad regime was very much a second order effect of the ongoing regional war between Israel and Iran. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, is keen to take credit for the fall of the Assad regime. I think that's going a bit too far, but it's clear that it is a consequence of that ongoing regional war, primarily because, of course, Hezbollah and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and Iranian-backed Iraqi militias were doing a lot of the fighting for the Assad regime, and then they pulled out. Now, a lot of us external observers would have characterized those groups as force multipliers for the Assad regime's armed forces. Basically, and what I mean there is that they were amplifying or augmenting the armed forces of the Syrian Arab Republic. Now, what we know in retrospect is that the dynamic was the other way around. It was the armed forces, the indigenous Syrian government armed forces, who were, I guess, force multipliers of those external militias and those external groups. And once those groups left because of the broader geopolitical pressure and dynamics, it was just a matter of time until the Assad regime collapsed. The Assad regime soldiers were simply not willing to fight or die for the regime, particularly once you remove all of those far more experienced and able fighters from elsewhere. So that was the first of the second order effects. The other is that once the Assad regime fell and you had Ahmed al-Shara, who previously was Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, come to power, and the HTS movement, you had the second order and hangover effects in terms of legitimizing and engaging with his regime. And a lot of that came from the West and also the Gulf states. This feeling that, okay, we've been here before. We've seen a brutal Arab dictator fall in Libya, in Iraq, and then we've been very, very optimistic. But actually, what's replaced him has been instability, disorder, civil war, or chaos, or indeed more extremist Islamist groups. So there was a reluctance on the part of the West because of those hangovers from elsewhere to engage with the new regime. And of course, this is not helped by the past of the new regime itself. That, you know, obviously we know that they were linked to Al Qaeda, they were linked to the Islamic State. Despite all of Ahmed al-Shara, all the things he was saying to the effect that they've now distanced themselves from those groups once they came to power. Now, I think what was critical here in terms of second order effects is something that actually happened in the Gulf before the Assad regime fell, and that's the détente between Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Don't want to go into it too much here, but previously these states were not getting on, and the Qataris had invested a lot in the relationship with HDS. That, you know, their I guess their strategic logic is we want to bring them in from the cold, whereas the Saudis are very, very suspicious of Islamist linked movements these days. But because of that detente, the Qataris were leaning on the Saudis and saying, look, Ahmed al-Shara is actually someone with whom we can and should do business, and the Turks were saying the same as well. And that slowly but surely brought the Saudis into the equation more, and it pushed them to take the calculated risk of engaging with Ahmed al-Shara. And the critical thing here is that he said the magic words that people wanted to hear in European capitals, in the US, but also particularly in Riyadh, when Ahmed al-Shara said that the revolution ends here. You know, in December of last year, he said, we are, you know, very clearly inferring that this is not Iran in 1979. We are not going to be a destabilizing power. We actually are now going to focus internally on state building. We don't want to be a threat to anyone, Israel or otherwise. This is exactly what the Saudis wanted to hear. And I guess it inculcated this perception that this is now a golden opportunity for the West and also for the Gulf states to tear Syria away from the axis of resistance, to stop it being a revisionist power and actually flip it to a status quo power and an ally of the Gulf states and the West. So once the Saudis were on side, they then started pushing the US to also take that calculated risk. And I think the way they sold this to the Americans was, okay, Ahmed al-Shara, not our guy. But he's also very much not Russia or Iran's guy. We know that he has an antagonistic relationship with them, and therefore we have a chance here to change Syria's geopolitical orientation, regardless of what actually happens internally. The Biden administration were moderately receptive to this, I would say, but it was the Trump administration where things really notched up a level. And again, that's the second order effect of the Gulf states managing to position themselves as so-called Trump whisperers. Okay, the very few people who seem to have the ear of the president and the ability to persuade him to change US policy. So we all talk about Ahmed al-Shara's transition from jihadist to statesman, wearing his, you know, Che Guevara fatigues and hat to suddenly wearing a suit. But actually, Trump's had as much of a miracle transition as well, from someone who said, you know, Syria's a mess, we shouldn't get involved, not our problem, to being, you know, to meeting Ahmed al-Shara in May in Riyadh, and then of course inviting him to the White House in November. So I think a lot of that is a second order effect of this new and emerging balance of power in the region, where the Gulf states are not only remaining close to the Americans, but have the ability to shape US policy in the region. And as a result, you see things like the Trump administration pausing the Caesar Act, for example, rescinding or working to rescind a lot of the sanctions that are crippling investment in Syria. Now we see the Gulf states basically and working with Turkey. So far, they have overlapping interests to build a new Syria in terms of investment. Now, something that's interesting here is that this is not the standard Gulf model investment. They're not just throwing public sector money and humanitarian aid at Syria. This is very much focused on getting private Gulf businesses to invest in the country. So it's a new economic model of Gulf investment. The long-term effects remain to be seen. But we are seeing significant investment. For example, the UAE the most reluctant of the Gulf states to engage with Ahmed al-Shara, now investing $800 million in Tartus port, for example. And I'll finish with, I think, the key problem from an external angle at the moment, which is Israel. Now, in my many conversations, well, my limited contacts with the Israeli defense and security establishment, I've said to them, look, you guys have an issue here. Whereas the Saudis and the Gulf states and the Americans think that the key to a stable Syria is strengthening it, rehabilitating its government, bring it into the international system. The Israelis want a weak, fragmented, and divided Syria. That is exactly what the Iranians want. So when I talk to the Israelis, I say, look, if you guys have the same goals here as Iran, you're probably not doing the right thing in terms of your own grand strategy. Obviously, they're not buying that. But the Israeli perception went from basically Ahmed al-Shara is still al-Jalani, he's a terrorist, no matter if he wears a suit or not. Transitioned from that to, okay, he might actually be a decent guy, or someone with whom we can do business, but he's a figurehead. He's a weak leader. He has no actual power over his own fighters, let alone the rest of Syria, and therefore Israel has to continue its actions. We saw, of course, Israel very, very quickly after the Assad regime fall, occupy around 600 square kilometers of Syrian territory, carry out an unprecedented number of airstrikes. Initially, this was justified as we need to take out the remaining chemical weapon stocks of the Assad regime. That excuse wore thin very, very soon, and then the Israeli government, you started hearing them say things like, we are not going to leave anytime soon. And then also taking on a kind of humanitarian mission, if you like, very, very similar to what you heard in the West after 9/11, that Israel has to protect minority groups in Syria, not just the Druze and Swaida, but also you're hearing increasing focus on the Kurds and the Alawites as well. So I would say overall, Israel has replaced Iran and Russia as the key spoilers within Syria today. Iran and Russia haven't gone away, but it's actually Israel's destabilizing behavior there that's having a very, very negative effect. And now we know the Trump administration are unhappy with this, but whether they can rein them in remains to be seen. Obviously, the degree to which America can influence Israel for the better overall in the region is still very much an open question. There's been some tentative progress on Syria, for example, with the Israelis and Syrians sitting down to direct talks, but we're still seeing that continuing paradigm of Israel carrying out arrests, attacks, airstrikes, and of course it doesn't seem willing or able to end its occupation anytime soon. I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Feras.
Thank you very much indeed for your intervention, Rob. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about that, and we'll get to that when we get to the Q&A. Right, so our next speaker is Mazen Gharibah, who's a policy researcher at the LSE Middle East Center. And we've got the fact that Mazen specializes in Syrian governance, local administration, and the political economy of conflict and reconstruction. So Mazen will focus on issues facing civil society while touching on the increasing sectarian violence and the fragility of social cohesion. So the floor is yours, Mazen. We're all ears.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to be here amongst friends, Firas, Rob, and Jackson. So yes, as Firas said, in my intervention, I will try to highlight some of the findings, main findings derived from my latest paper, which will be published soon, on civic spaces during the first year of post-Assad Syria. So this paper falls within our methodology at the LSE Syria team with the civicness and civil and conflict research group, which we measure civic spaces and activism in Syria as one of the main indicators for the evolving conflict dynamics, political inclusion, and freedom of expression and assembly. So, as most of you know, in the early post-Assad period, Syrians really embraced civic engagement, with communities stepping in to provide relief, public services, intercommunal dialogues. In the first 3 months after the fall of Assad, Syria witnessed an unprecedented revitalization of civicness and civic movements. It was something never seen before, even during the first period of the revolution itself. Many diaspora-based NGOs and civil society actors of the country were able to reposition themselves, to reallocate to the country, specifically in areas formerly controlled by Assad, where civic actions were excessively oppressed. The early proliferation of civil society actions was mainly driven by, in my opinion, two main factors. Firstly, there was a growing sense of collective responsibility from local communities. There was a growing sense of agency and ownership to fill a governance vacuum left by the Assad's collapse and to maintain basic services and stability. Was something that was driven by the community. It was a very kind of bottom-up um, civilian-led actions. Secondly, civil society actors have been reclaiming public spaces to safeguard their role in the transitional phase and limit any future possible political repressions. So civil society, they wanted to be seen as soon as possible after the fall of Assad in order to say, we're here, we played an integral role in the continuation of the Syrian revolution, and we should be seen as a key partner in the transitional period. Unfortunately, this was not the case. So according to our field work and interviews, we've been noticing that the newly acquired civic spaces have been gradually restricted, specifically after the March coastal attacks or coastal massacres, the mass killings of civilians in the Alawite majority of the coastal areas, which deepened sectarian divides even more and spread intercommunal sectarian violence to other areas, especially to the Sweda region, where we unfortunately also had to live through yet another massacre against civilians in Sweda. At the same time, the transitional government rushed, centralized, and exclusionary approach marked by selective disarmament and tolerance of allied armed groups eroded public trust, reinforced perceptions of injustice and authoritarian tendencies. So even when we talk to government officials, actually, they also highlight that there are kind of emerging trends which show that the political leadership of the transitional authority is avoiding engagement with civil society organizations as collective actors. They're opting instead for individual consultations. So the transitional authorities has not specifically acknowledged any clear role of civil society in the transition. Instead, the authorities have been emphasizing المجتمع الأهلي, the communal society, not the civil society. المجتمع الأهلي, communal society, in their definition is rooted in religious, sectarian, and tribal ties. And this has kind of reinforced political marginalization and prioritized ascriptive affiliations or identity-based affiliations and political loyalties over organizational capacity and kind of civil participation. When we talk to different civil society actors, the interviews reveal that transition authorities are also increasingly imposing formal and informal constraints on civil society. And it seems these informal constraints are being now the norm, the new norm in Syria. So even if you're talking about governance, the informal politics or informal governance is what's really happening now in Syria. So this kind of constraints on civil society actors, particularly those here, I need to make this disclaimer that these restrictions are particularly targeted at civil society organizations who operate beyond the humanitarian and relief sector, because humanitarian NGOs, they're now enjoying an unprecedented margin, to be honest. For many reasons, because their ability to attract international funding during this economic hardship, and also because they legitimize and they give credit to the current government and authorities, so they also legitimize certain service delivery aspects. But civil society works in the issues of human rights, advocacy, social mobilization, social change, social cohesion, peace building. They're facing increasingly more and more restrictions and constraints. So these constraints are fall into three categories. We are facing regulative constraints, so inconsistent registration policies grant the state wider discretion with overlapping roles between the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs and the the General Secretariat for Political Affairs, which is the domestic arm of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there is something called the GCAPA, or the General Secretariat for Political Affairs, or the DPA. It has so many names. And basically, they're the new kind of Ba'ath. I don't want to say kind of the Ba'ath party because they don't really operate like a party, but they're the kind of the state intelligence apparatus within different state institutions. So if you want to register an organization or hold any event, you need an approval from the DPA, from the Department of Political Affairs, or the General Secretariat of Political Affairs, which is directly linked to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And this is actually creating a lot of issues and tensions with the Ministry of Social Affairs. There's an unclarity between kind of roles and responsibilities. And there's this kind of increasing tension actually between these two entities. When we say regulative constraints and when we say inconsistent, it's really hard now to map out the actual policies for registration process, because the question is, it depends on where you are. So if you're in Hama, you have a totally different policies than than if you're in Damascus. If you're a grassroots organization that really has no powerful donors behind you, the process will be different from an NGO, a well-established NGO in the diaspora will really have kind of big donors behind them. So it really depends. There's no streamlined policies, and we believe this is something intentional in order to give this kind of discretion and try to do more constraints. There are also spatial constraints, like strict selectively enforced authorization requirements for public events, which restrict initiatives, specifically initiatives on justice, advocacy, and political right and inclusion. So, for instance, in some governorates, like in Homs and I believe in other areas, the authorities, the relevant authorities, whether the DPA or the governorate councils, they said the social cohesion discussions, and I know Roua will discuss that, the issue of social cohesion and justice in more details. But they will say, well, this is the function of the state. We don't want anyone to interfere with that. So, for instance, they've been canceling or preventing any kind of social dialogues or intercommunal dialogues in the coastal areas, basically saying this is our role and responsibility, and we don't want civil society to be involved in this. So this kind of restricting the spaces, the actual physical spaces of civil society. And the third constraints fall under, of course, political constraints, which is kind of the exclusion of many civil society organizations, civic actors from key transitional forums, such as the National Dialogue Conference, which we all know it was kind of only happened in like 6 hours. That's it. That's a whole conference after 15 years of conflict. We haven't seen any civil society actors in the Constitutional Declaration Committee. Even those individual civil society actors who actually participated in national commissions, such as the National Commission over the Missings or the National Commission for Transitional Justice, they lack proper access to decision-making mechanisms with the relevant authorities and ministries, with ad hoc and limited coordination capacity with the wider civil society. Since March 2025, such restrictions have been intensified, particularly for, as we said, activities beyond relief and economic development. Many human rights and justice activists report that unless organizations contribute directly to economic revival, authorities increasingly obstruct their access through security constraints or by kind of new rhetoric, like stigmatizing them as regime sympathizers or calling them fulul, regime remnants, which is now the new term for kind of exclusionary term. So that is, Feras is telling me that time is up. Yes, I've talked a lot, and of course, I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you so much.
Do feel free to just wrap it up quickly if you wanted to. Sorry, just wanted to alert you.
Okay,
or we could come back to it later. We can come back to it.
Let's come back to it later. Yes.
All right. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Mazen. Again, an excellent intervention. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions later. Now, our next speaker is Dr. Roua Al Taweel. Of course, Roua is also a SAN member. SAN is SAN member and SAN founder. She's a fellow trustee. So SAN is the Syrian Academics and Researchers Network in the UK. Roua herself is an academic, and her research extensively covers forced displacement, nationality laws, and the socio-legal dimensions of the Syrian refugee crisis. And her talk today will consider issues of transitional justice and social cohesion, which touches again on some of the topics that Mazen had just talked about. She will also cover issues of forced displacement, and she will reflect on her recent experience of having visited various parts of the country. Okay, Roa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Feras. And I'm really, really glad to be here speaking to the audience today about Syria. I've returned to Syria 4 months ago, and I joined a local organization called Bahar, which works at the Humanitarian Development Peace Nexus, through which I had the privilege to access like different regions across Syria, including Sweida. I went into Sweida 3 times and a few times in Northeast region and Latakia, Idlib, Aleppo, like different regions really. And I just want to start by saying like being outside of Syria is really different than being inside of Syria. So like inside there's lots more nuance in the sense that you see where it happens and like the dynamics are very interesting and you know that everyone is trying like their best to actually do something and like come out of this conflict. I have prepared like a visual of the map and the divisions just to make it easier for you to see how Syria is divided today, but unfortunately the technical part did not help to present it. So I think I will focus on a very important question that we all have now in Syria. 1 year after the collapse of the Assad regime, many of us is asking whether Syria has finally entered a post-conflict phase and whether like we are on the right path towards transition and justice. And the honest answer from this past year is not yet. Political change at the top does not automatically translate into peace on the ground, and we see this in Syria today as currently the state national security is still jeopardized, and like my colleagues have already spoken about this. And we're witnessing different divisions across the political, like the ethnic, the sectarian, even the regional lines in Syria. I want to just mention like a few observations that I collected through my work. In Northeast, for example, in addition to the ethnic tension, we have like the issue of the returnees from Al-Hol camp. And this is really an important issue because it relates directly to terrorism and counterterrorism and the aftermath of the conflict. In Latakia, we have the sectarian tension on rise, particularly after like the massacre that took place in March, as my colleague Mazen has mentioned. There is a widespread revenge dynamics. And like these are across the political lines as well, because the perception of Latakia, for example, being the base of Assad regime is creating a lot of tension. In Sweida, Sweida is practically separated from the Syrian government as like NAS. But people in Sweden are completely disappointed about how the situation was handled, and particularly when we think about the hate speech that's been nationally widespread against the Druze community. So I wanted to mention these, and also like not only to work around like the major lines of divisions in Syria, but also to add to that there are like intra-group dynamics that are also like interesting and require of us a bit of attention. We can speak, for example, in an area like Afrin, we can speak about the Kurdish tension of those who stayed under like throughout the past few years, and those who were displaced, and who and like the perception of those who are stayed as like affiliated with the Turkish forces and the Syrian government. The same goes for the Suwaida Daraa. Okay. So I think like what I've noticed in my work is that we can speak about like a regional division for sure. We can speak about rise of hate speech, and all of these are worrying trends. We are not past conflict yet. We are pretty much still in it. Whether like to do with the geopolitics that my colleague Rob has mentioned earlier, or to do with inter-country. So and on this, I think we ask like what the transition and justice means for Syria. And I think like there are two main issues that still unresolved, and these like among all the structural grievances and the other things that I mentioned, and these are the civil registry and the forced displacement and property rights, right? So civil registry had been used as a tool of war, like forced displacement itself, and now millions of Syrians don't have proper documentations, whether they are like birth certificates, marriage documents, property deeds, death documentation, etc., etc. So all of these documents are missing for different reasons and in different areas to different extent as well. Partly because of the conflict, partly because of the natural disaster like the earthquake, etc. But without these, people cannot access services or reclaim property or prove identity, and like they can't even prove their membership to the government, like to the state of Syria, or participate in any possible process that aim for democracy. And in terms of forced displacement, I also have prepared like this map that shows the trends of returnees, and we have, according to UNHCR, more than 1.5 million Syrian had returned since the liberation, right? But now we're finding a new trend of like new waves of migration, and particularly because of the education system. And because the country is not ready to receive the returnees, there are no services. Humanitarian situation is dire. And it is important to mention that within a year, there was no actual efforts to address any of these issues in terms of like reparation, in terms of reconstruction, and this is important to note for the governmental. From the governmental side, although I have to say also that the government had been making some important steps towards transitional justice, including, for example, establishing the National Commission of Transitional Justice, the National Commission for the missing person. It's very slow in pace, that's for sure. But I am in contact with different people who are working on these efforts, and I know that they are also cautious about like how to move so that they don't like they avoid making mistakes, let's say, or like ignite tension. So they want to ensure that the work they do is a bit like it's conflict sensitive and it's on the right track. I just want to mention like problematic trends in terms of like transitional justice. The government had conducted certain reports, investigation for the massacre and like other events, and the results of these reports were super disappointing in terms of like, let's say one of the critique was lacking recognition for what has happened and the nature of what has happened. For example, by stating that, well, none of the actions that's been taken place in Latakia had like were like that had sectarian basis, for example, or were motivated by sectarian like tension, which to the obvious Syrian like citizen it had been. So, but anyways, there is also the tendency, or you hear in Syria today, a slogan that's basically من يحرر يقرر, and it translates literally as whoever liberates decides, which is a little bit problematic as well, because if we are thinking about like how to build Syria for all Syrians, and then also the reduction of transitional justice to criminal prosecution. So there are like a couple of trends now within like in the transitional justice landscape that are taking the most attention, and one of them is criminal prosecution, and everyone wants to see like those who perpetuated war crimes being accounted, being held accountable, sorry, and that's fair. And then also the issue of the missing, and both are very, very important, but they are not everything. And transitional justice, transitional justice include judicial and non-judicial mechanisms, and there's so much needed in terms of like the like social cohesion, reconciliation, and non-judicial mechanisms to basically reconcile what has happened, and an acknowledgement and recognition is on top of these. So it's a very, very important pillar, because the whole point is to acknowledge the harm so that we can repair it, and also to institutional reform as well, including the legal frameworks reform is another important pillar where that ensure non-recurrence. So these two important pillars, I don't see much happening in them, unfortunately, after a year. So what kind of social contract does Syria need today? I think
I'm very sorry to come in, just very briefly, just if you
this
could
is the
wrap
last
up.
point.
Okay.
This is the last
very
point.
quickly, please. Yeah, okay.
I think it's important that if like going forward from this moment to think about social a contract that address equal citizenship for all ethnic, religious, and gender groups, and ensure local autonomy within a unified national framework, even if it is decentralized. That's like not an issue, and a mechanism for political participation and accountability, which is, as Mazen mentioned, like kind of like a tricky space at the moment, because there is a space for how long we can keep it and maintain that space is another question. And lastly, the guarantees for rights and freedom, not just security arrangements, but rather than like the spaces for people to celebrate their sub-identities, to actually live together and coexist as they are. So I think like this is thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Roua. Again, a really fascinating intervention, which touches on some of the things I want to talk about. Let me just time myself. I think I'll try and finish mine a little bit sooner, just because of the time instructions as well. So my intervention is a little bit different. I mean, of course, you've touched on lots of really important kind of topics and areas. Mine is a bit more of an intercultural kind of perspective, because I wasn't actually actually born in Syria, but I experienced Syria as a child. I was born in Dubai, lived there until the age of 12, and we would come and visit our grandparents every summer. And I experienced so much love and so much contentedness, but also so many strange things that to my little boy's mind didn't make much sense. And I'm going to start with an anecdote to kind of highlight the thing. And I suppose, this is for the benefit of people who haven't really experienced Syria or have heard things about Syria or the Assad regime, etc. But I also want to reflect on what's happened over, well, I mean, I cannot reflect on what's happened over the past 15 years because I hadn't been in the country since 2010. So I'd actually left. My last visit was before the war started, or the whole conflict started in 2011. So for me, it's not just 1 year kind of marking the collapse of the Assad regime. It's actually quite historic in lots of different ways. But let me just go back to I suppose it was one of those visits where we were visiting in the summer normally. And my brother and I loved our granddad taking us on long walks along the Roda. There was a river there. We used to kind of listen to the frogs, and he used to make impressions of the frogs, and he used to take us places, buy us things. It was all lovely. I mean, obviously, I'm talking about it from a very young child's kind of perspective, but it felt very, very different. One thing that manifested itself well, I would say it was shapeless and nameless. It was the fear, the barrier of fear that really people kind of had. And for me, I think I experienced it mainly, the first time I remember experiencing it was when our granddad took me and my brother. Again, this is a bit funny actually, because at the time there was no public transport in the UAE. I mean, everybody had cars. Things had changed slightly now. So for us to go on a bus was a bit of an adventure. And we loved those buses. There was a green bus and a red bus, and they were quite big. They were like Soviet era, I suppose, buses. And we had brought with us a couple of stickers. We bought them from the UAE. And again, I mean, that's another thing. You weren't really able to buy lots of things which for us felt quite kind of ordinary. You could buy them, etc. Everything was quite kind of restricted. And then my granddad bought us a notebook. And we sat on the bus, we were kind of coloring and things. And then my brother, who is apparently listening to this Zoom seminar, so he's in Canada, so just say hello to him. He basically took one of the stickers. It was a sticker of Kermit the Frog. And he stuck it on top of the picture of Hafiz al-Assad, which was on... I can see Rob smiling. So he stuck the picture of Kermit the Frog on the picture of Hafiz al-Assad. So Hafiz al-Assad is Bashar Assad's father. And in those days, if you bought anything from the Syrian state, I mean, most things came with the picture of the president on it. And we were sitting on the bus. And I remember, I mean, there's no words exchanged, but my granddad just took everything off us, put it in a black bag, took us both off the bus, and he just dragged me behind him. I was a bit older than my brother, and my brother was held. And on the way down from the bus, he just pointed at the picture of Hafiz al-Assad and said, "Ow, ow, ow," which is woof, 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 which was not insult. Now, this wasn't really spoken about very much, but for a child to experience something like that really was, it was a first-hand experience of fear that was nameless. It was almost a bit like a possession, when people, people just don't want to mention the devil because, it might tempt fate and the rest of it. And this is just one episode to kind of highlight that sense of fear. Now, my other episode, which was a bit more comical than this, actually. So my last visit to Syria, it was in 2010. I came with a British friend. He stayed with us here in Damascus. And momentarily, just a dodgy the Mukhabarat person just appeared downstairs. The Mukhabarat is the secret intelligence service in Syria, and they look very, very sort of obvious, like cheap leather jackets. I mean, they do have a particular look, and you don't really want to kind of cross any of them. But he just appeared there. I mean, to be fair to him at the time, he didn't say anything, but he was there. I mean, you're sort of being watched, kind of thing. And we went out to the old city, we came back, etc. And this guy just appeared just everywhere, basically, which was quite hilarious. I mean, I remember one afternoon, we went to one of those old Damascene kind of like Beit Jabri, which is like a like traditional kind of restaurant, which is like an old sort of house with a. And then this guy appeared, and I kid you not, he had like a newspaper with two holes into sitting and watching us. And it was like, I mean, this. So anyway, so the war happened. And obviously, I mean, knowing that, I mean, hearing the news and hearing all the fear and all the drama that was going on, I mean, obviously, it was very, very sad and upsetting. And you realize there was nothing really you could do. So I put all of my memories of Syria in a little box, and I put it in the back of my mind. And I thought I couldn't. I really just, I'd heard stories and things, but engaging in it was a bit too difficult. Now, come this time last year, things changed and people started revisiting, going back to the country, even people who were wanted by the regime. But part of me was just, I just couldn't face it. The idea, I mean, there was a real fear. Even if you arrived at the airport, I mean, this is before the war, if you arrived at the airport, you would always be, okay, gosh, so what are they going to say now? What are they going to find something against you? Are they going to accuse you of something? But also having witnessed from afar all the atrocities that happened, all the news, all the snipers, all the things, just part of me couldn't take that image out of my head. And then I've spoken to many people who have visited, that things have changed, but it's really difficult unless you see it yourself. I arrived here about 10 days ago, and I remember feeling that fear that kind of grips your heart. Until I walked into the immigration kind of offices and I spoke to them. And to my surprise, they were really friendly. They were very nice. They were smiling. They welcomed me back home. I mean, my one observation on that was how rude some of the passengers were really actually to them, which is something that would never, ever happen back in the days. So for me, I think seeing is believing, I suppose. And in this instance, yes, things have changed on that front. In fact, so many things have changed, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, but also nothing has changed at the same time. I think that the soul of the place is still there. There's still love and kindness and tenderness, but also there is more poverty and misery and things. But, I mean, if I had to come up with a wish list for Syria, I mean, I would agree with pretty much most of the things that my colleagues here have said, about the need to reconstruct the country properly, and the need to have a system where everybody belongs. I mean, Syria has always been like a mosaic of all sorts of ethnicities, cultures, subcultures. Everybody needs to be equal under the law. And once all of that has been achieved, once people feel a little bit of like prosperity, when things have been, my main focus, I suppose, would be on education. I think the Syrian education system lacks a lot of critical thinking. I mean, lots of things are just given as facts. I mean, one of my experiences when I first started studying in the UK, having studied in different countries before, but I did my master's and my PhD at Sussex University, I was genuinely struck by my first seminar when the lecturer asked about my opinion about the text. Now, of course, I went to England to do English literature in England, so no pressure, So I did all the reading, But where I did English literature for the Damascus University, I mean, the emphasis was more on, okay, well, this is the text, this is the analysis, this is the right answer, repeat it and you pass. Now, of course, we all had lots of things to say about it, but like dissidence wasn't a good idea in a way, or not even dissidents, but just sort of having a slightly different narrative wasn't. And I think for the new Syria, once we've established all the basic stuff, I think the way to move forward and to kind of live our democracy, because democracy comes with a sense of responsibility. In order to kind of live it and enjoy it in that sense, I think we need to focus on critical thinking, accept that truth is plural, that it's okay to disagree, that there are different opinions, and I think that can kind of disseminate itself into the rest of society. So I am hopeful, but I'm also cautious, and I think that says nothing in a way, but says everything. And I'm going to stop here. So thank you very much. And we now have the floor for questions. I can already see that we've got 3 questions. I'm going to start by the first one. So how safe is international business travel to Damascus at present? And what level of international business visitors in the city seeing? any notable examples of major Western companies already reinvesting yet? I mean, I'm sure some of my colleagues may want to say something about this, but actually, I mean, just funny enough, because I was somewhere yesterday and I ran out of cash, and I heard that they were reinstating the SWIFT system, whatever. So I went on ChatGPT, of course, that's what you do. And it seems that apparently you can use Visa cards now, but only in select places. So I went to the Four Seasons Hotel because it was indicated that there was one there, but then everybody was celebrating, and I thought, you know what, I'm not going to go and try. So I don't know. I mean, I suppose. I don't know. I mean, if anybody else here, I suppose Roa has been living here longer than I have, and she'd be able maybe to answer that question or whoever.
Yeah, I'm not really sure I have an answer for that question, but I can say that the general perception is that the government is outside, like directing its energy towards the international actors and and also towards investment opportunities. So basically there is like a good foundation for business to happen, because this is like what we see the government policy is at this stage. But I can't tell really because I don't have the information or the data on Western investment particularly. I would say from the people that I know from the West visiting Syria is that it is possible, but I would never advise it, give it as an advice that you can go into Syria at the moment, because it is unstable. It's like, again, as Firas mentioned, we're all optimistic. We're all going there, and it's not as insecure. Like the insecurity level is not as before during Assad, but it's still kind of like there are lots of uncertainty and lots of cautious around moving and working in Syria today.
Thank you, Roa. I can see that Mazen's hand is up as well as Rob. So let's start with Mazen and then we go to Rob. Thank you.
Thank you, Firas. Yes, I want to comment on two questions, a question about investment and a question about the UK policy as well, just to save up some time, if that's okay. So yes, as Roa said, when it comes to international investment, there are some things that are happening. So of course, there have been some good investments, but mainly in the energy sector and mainly with the government. So there's the 7 billion contract to rehabilitate the energy sector through different companies, US companies, as you would imagine, Concord and got the name of the other company, which will also have a kind of exclusion rights for oil digging on the coastal areas and in Syria's national waters. Other than that, when it comes to individual investments, we haven't seen much of that. Of course, the banking sector problem, the lack of financial services. Syria has been out of the financial system for years. And that's also a problem. And also there is this lack of clarity on the economic governance, who's taking the decisions. And that's kind of also concerning for a lot of investors coming to Syria. So of course, the lack of stability and all of that, lack of transparency and so forth. And that also poses a very difficult question, which is the reconstruction question in Syria. Who's going to do reconstruction? Obviously, most states.
Mazen, would you like just to read out the question since you're going to answer it, and then we're going to go to. Can I please ask you to keep it? Yeah.
Yes. Has the UK foreign policy in Syria since the fall of Assad regime been beneficial, determinant, or negligible in promoting state stability? I would say the UK foreign policy in Syria has been it's been good so far. We need international engagement with the Syrian state and the Syrian authorities, and that's happening. The UK was one of the first few countries who actually lifted the sanctions, visited Damascus, and tried to meet with the transition authorities. I believe this is good. We need to keep this engagement with the state. And I think that, but however, we haven't seen any sort of like a pressure or even kind of this bargaining with the current state. So we need more involvement from international actors, partners, when it comes to security sector reform. We haven't seen that. In terms of DDR programs, we also haven't seen that. In terms of reconstruction, supporting financial services, we haven't seen that. So I would say the UK policy has been good so far, but it's limited, and we need the UK to be more more involved, more actionable in these kind of technical sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And just to add to this last question, sorry, about the UK foreign policy, if that's okay.
Yeah. Could we come back to, because I'm just looking at the time, move on. Jackson, would it be okay if we were to stay a little bit beyond 5 o'clock or not? I'm talking just 5 minutes beyond, or
GMT. That's we are supposed to be.
Sorry, I meant 2 o'clock. Yeah, I meant 2 o'clock. Yes.
But if we run a 3 or 4 minutes over, that's fine.
Okay. All right.
No worries.
Okay. Could we come back to you, Roua, in a minute? Just I wanted to give Rob the chance to answer that. Yes, please. Yeah.
Yes, so if I may, just very quickly on the, as Mazen mentioned, most of the foreign investment in Syria has been in the oil and gas sectors. That's the big area where the government knows it can get the investment. However, most of that has actually been GCC-based companies. There has, as Mazen mentioned, been some tentative investment from the US. Now, from US companies, there's three primary impediments to further foreign investment, particularly from the West. One is that the Caesar Act hasn't actually been officially repealed by an act of Congress. It's just been suspended by the Trump administration by executive decree. So there's always a chance that it can just snap back into place if there's another administration, for example. The second issue is the lack of infrastructure and transparency on the ground. So I think that foreign companies are finding it very, very difficult to invest locally simply because there's not a consistency or a transparency across government, and the private sector is only just returning. The third issue, and this relates to the fact that most of the investment is in the oil and gas sector, most of the oil in Syria is obviously in eastern Syria, in the SDF dominated regions of the country. So the fact that this seems to be the next flashpoint for a conflict means that foreign companies, and particularly Western companies, are not particularly keen to invest. On the other hand, you could argue that actually that has constrained Turkey and the Syrian government's action against the SDF in eastern Syria, because there is an understanding that if there was going to be a massive violent flare-up, all of this good work the Syrian government and Shabani has undertaken to reach out to all these companies would come to naught, because all of those deals they'd pull out straight away, basically. So that is actually still constraining the Syrian government from escalating in eastern Syria. So there is some good and some bad here, but the long and short of it is that Western companies are still largely staying away. US State Department and FCDO advice is obviously against travel to Syria. So until that changes, you're unlikely to see a major willingness to take a big risk, and it still is a big risk in investing in Syria.
Feras, your microphone is off.
I was about to say.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, thanks, Jackson. Okay, I'm just looking at the rest of the questions. We probably don't have time to answer all of them, I'm afraid. I'm just let me choose one very quickly. I would choose the one by Gillian Dare, because that's one that's asked to all of us. So all of you have spoken about the breakdown of trust community and the need to rebuild these. One of the biggest barriers to achieving this is the level of trauma throughout the population. What is being done to address the issue? Now, Gillian is saying that Gillian chairs an NGO which helps communities to address individual and collective trauma in conflict and affected kind of countries. So I think that's an interesting question, and all of us probably can chip in. I think for me, I'm going to start very brief. I'm going to keep it really brief. I think for me, probably an act of storytelling, an act of honesty, an act of just just listening and hearing out each other. And I think literature, music, art in general has a great role to play here. But I'm going to stop here because others also have to say. Now, can I please, before everybody else answers, those who've asked the questions, I'm really sorry because of restrictions of time. If you'd like to email us individually, please feel free to do so. If you just look us up online, you'll find our email addresses. Just wanted to say that. Okay, so who'd like to go next? Who'd like to answer that question next? Roa, would you like to go next? It's something that you work on, I think, as well. Yeah.
Sure. I just want to mention that there are some work happening in terms of like MHPSS and mental health in general in Syria, and it's done by different actors. Even when whether we speak, it depends really what issue we're focusing on. I know, for example, like the Center for Victims of Torture are supporting victim-led or associations of detainees or survivors of detention to in terms of mental health. I know that also there was a particular meeting at the Ministry of Health level to speak about or to discuss a strategy or a policy towards mental health across Syria. Many actors who are interested in supporting work in Syria, including the German governments, for example, is interested in this aspect, and it is very, very important to consider. But I would also just mention that in Syria, we really need a critical approach toward mental health. I know in the West it goes with the individual counseling. In Syria, the scale of the scale of trauma, the scale of violence, etc., requires different approaches. The individual one for sure, but also we need some collective mechanisms towards a mental health, and this can happen by collective work as the oral history, the storytelling, as Firas mentioned, but also really it is also directly connected to addressing the root cause of the conflict. We cannot speak about mental health without speaking about overcoming all the challenges and the tension, and this kind of go back towards supporting the marginalized groups, including women, because there was a question about women representation. I will stop here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Roa. That's really good answer. I've just asked the person who asked the question about women representation to write to you as well, because I know your work involves that. Rob, would you like to go next? And then we'll conclude with Mazen, and then Jackson would like to say a couple of words about the Middle East Association, which has organized and hosted this wonderful event.
Yeah, just very quickly on Iran in Syria. I think it's fair to say Iran is down but not out in Syria. It has taken a significant blow here. And I was recently in a Track 1.5 dialogue with Iranians, and they recognize this. They know that they're not going to be able to get Syria back. So I think at the moment their emphasis is less on kind of, bringing it back into the axis of resistance and more on using it as a conduit for weapons smuggling and also cash smuggling to Hezbollah in Lebanon. So they are trying to keep their networks there. Don't forget that Iran has very extensive and established networks in Syria. Just because Assad fled to Moscow doesn't mean those networks collapsed. Those people were being paid to be involved in the arms smuggling business, so they want to keep being paid. So there's still an interest there in serving Iran. The key difference, of course, is that the regime is now acting against Iranian smuggling efforts, against arms shipments to Hezbollah, intercepting them. And this is something that the Trump administration have really been pressing the Israelis on to say, look, they are doing what you want them to do. Kind of, what else do you want from them? And at the moment, the Israelis just haven't been able to give a clear answer, really. And I think that's the key potential flashpoint for future conflict, not just the SDF, of course, in the east, but the fact that the Israelis and the Syrian government have actually sat down for the first time in decades, and that looked like real progress. But so far, we're not seeing any results of that progress on the ground, unfortunately.
Thank you, Rob. Last but not least, we've got Mazen, and very briefly, please, and then we'll
I just want to say that
Jackson.
Syria's reconstruction will be very, I think, unique or exceptional in terms that it seems that it's going to be like private sector-led reconstruction. No governments would actually invest resources in the reconstruction of Syria, and we've been seeing that from whether Western states or even GCC countries. The GCC countries have been very vocal about this, that we're not going to be paid for the reconstruction of Syria. We're gonna do the same as the UK or the US. We're going to encourage our private investors, private sector actors to invest in Syria, and that's all very bad because this will lead to what I'm calling is the Beirut scenario, or the construction of Beirut, which basically means that we're gonna have like very big, massive, beautiful neighborhoods, buildings that no one can afford to live in, and let's remember that 90% of Syrians live below the poverty line. So Syria is going to face a very rising inequalities in the near future, more and more grievances. That's why we need to prioritize social cohesion and peace building. These are not just buzzwords. We need to do that by engaging with the local communities. The current state, they mainly rely on external sources of legitimacy, as Roua said, and we need these kind of external actors to exert some pressure, more pressure, meaningful pressure on them. And also we need the current authorities to invest in domestic legitimacy by actually having an actual representative council, people's assembly, reopening national dialogues, and kind of rebuilding social trust.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Now we're going to conclude with Jackson, who's going to tell us more about the Middle East Association.
Well, thank you very much, Feras, and thank you to all of our panelists for your time and insights. We've reached the end of the webinar, but I think everyone online will agree it's been time very well spent. Today's discussion has underlined just how complex Syria's transition has been, and indeed, it will be politically, socially, and at a very personal human level. The perspectives you guys have all shared, from governance and security through to the lived experience and memory, are all exactly the kind of contributions that need to be heard as policymakers, analysts, and Syrians themselves think about what comes next. Let's hope some of the ideas raised today travel beyond this webinar and help inform those wider conversations. On behalf of the Middle East Association, thank you to you all who have joined us, asked questions, and stayed with us to the end. If you'd like to stay engaged with any of the Middle East Association's work, please do keep an eye on our upcoming events. One of which is our YPG Christmas drinks on the 15th of December between 6:30 to 9 p.m. So we will definitely be looking forward to seeing a lot of you there. And we really appreciate your support and interest in these issues. Thank you once again to all the speakers, to Feras for moderating, and to all of you online. We hope to see you at all the future MEA events. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.